That's the story. I want to pursue truth in a manner that makes things better. That's the story part. And you might say, well, that's self-evident. Like, it's only self-evident when it's working properly. When it's not working properly, things get bad quick.
In the summer of 2025, Jordan Peterson was in an ICU, barely able to move, while his daughter told millions that even doctors had no clear answers.
And I would have updated you guys sooner, but he's still been really sick, and he got worse over the last few months.
This came after years of setbacks, a prescription drug dependency that led him abroad for treatment, and a family crisis involving a rare, life-threatening cancer diagnosis. At 63, his life had become a series of escalating battles few could have imagined.
You cannot read about what they did without traumatizing yourself permanently for the rest of your life. It's the worst human atrocity I've ever seen by a lot.
So, how did it reach this point? And what really happened behind the headlines? Join us as we reveal how heartbreaking the tragedy of Jordan Peterson truly is. The man before the disaster. Jordan Burnt Peterson grew up in a world of long winters and limited horizons. But he was a reader from an early age and a thinker from even earlier. He studied political science at the University of Alberta before switching to psychology, ultimately earning his PhD from McGill University in Montreal. He taught at Harvard. He came back to Canada and joined the University of Toronto faculty, where he became a respected researcher and clinical psychologist. For most of his career, Jordan Peterson was known almost exclusively within academic circles. He published a serious, dense book in 1999 called Maps of Meaning that drew on psychology, mythology, religion, and philosophy to make an argument about how human beings construct meaning in their lives. It was a genuine scholarly achievement, and it sold modestly. Then, in 2016, he posted a series of YouTube videos criticizing a piece of proposed Canadian legislation around compelled use of gender-neutral pronouns. Those videos went viral and turned a university professor into one of the most talked-about public intellectuals on Earth, almost overnight. He was on every major podcast. He was debated in newspapers. He was praised by millions and despised by millions of others. In 2018, he published 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos, which sold over 5 million copies and hit #1 in multiple countries. He sold out arenas on every continent. At the peak of his reach in 2018 and 2019, Jordan Peterson was one of the most listened-to voices in the English-speaking world. And then, very quietly, while he was at that exact peak, something inside his life started breaking. The Jordan Peterson that most people know from the lectures and the books and the podcast appearances is a man who built his entire public identity around the idea of order versus chaos, of taking responsibility for your own life, of cleaning your room before you try to fix the world. The tragedy of what happened to him is that the chaos came for him anyway, regardless of how clearly he saw it coming for everyone else. It came in multiple forms at almost the same time, and none of them were things he could have prevented by following any of the rules he had spent his career articulating. It is worth pausing on exactly how large his platform had become by 2018 and 2019, because the contrast between that moment and what followed is what makes the story so striking. His lectures on YouTube were generating tens of millions of views. His interview with journalist Cathy Newman on Channel 4 in the UK became one of the most watched political debates of that year, and introduced him to an audience that had never heard of him. His book tour for 12 Rules for Life brought him to sold-out theaters in every major English-speaking city in the world. He was at the center of essentially every major cultural conversation happening in that period. And while all of that was happening in public, his wife was sitting in doctors' offices getting told that the cancer in her body had no known treatment and a 1-year survival rate of 0. He kept going to the lectures. He kept doing the interviews. He kept showing up. Very few people outside the family knew what was happening at home. He went from obscure professor to global phenomenon in the space of 2 years. Then the worst period of his life arrived almost immediately after the best period of his life. And it started not with his own health, but with his wife of more than 30 years being handed a piece of paper with a number on it: 0. The cancer with a 0% survival rate. Jordan and Tammy Peterson have been together since they were children, essentially. They met when they were around 8 or 9 years old, grew up near each other, and eventually married. By the time their life together reached its most publicly visible point in 2018 and 2019, they had been partners for decades. Their children, Michaela and Julian, were grown. The life they had built together was full and complicated, and real in the way that long marriages are real. And then, in 2019, Tammy was diagnosed with renal cell carcinoma, a kidney cancer so rare that the specific variant she had was almost never seen by oncologists anywhere in the world. The variant was called Bellini duct carcinoma. Jordan Peterson has described sitting in doctors' offices across North America and hearing the same thing repeated in slightly different language at every appointment. There was no treatment with evidence of success, and the 1-year survival rate was 0. The doctor who delivered the official diagnosis was visibly shaken. Tammy has described that appointment and said his hands were shaking as he handed her the papers to sign. She was told she had approximately 10 months to live. She went through 2 surgeries and a 5-week hospital stay. A 3rd surgery was scheduled and then canceled. And then something happened that her own doctors could not fully account for. She got better. She recovered. She is now described by one medical source as the only person in the world known to have survived this specific form of kidney cancer. Tammy Peterson entered the Catholic Church on Easter Sunday 2024, attributing her survival to her faith. Jordan Peterson called her recovery miraculous. The medical community has no better word for it either. But while Tammy was fighting for her life in 2019, Jordan was fighting something entirely different and far less visible. He had been prescribed a medication to manage his own anxiety while his wife was dying. That medication would eventually take him to the other side of the world and nearly kill him. His wife was facing a cancer with a 0% survival rate. He was being prescribed medication to cope with the stress of watching that happen. And what that medication did to him over the following months is the part of this story that most people who know the name Jordan Peterson have never fully understood. The prescription that became a nightmare. Benzodiazepines, Russia, and a medically induced coma. Jordan Peterson was first prescribed benzodiazepines in 2016 after developing a severe autoimmune reaction to food. Benzodiazepines are a class of drugs that includes medications like Valium and Xanax. They are widely used for anxiety, and they work in the short term. The problem is that they create physical dependency very quickly, and withdrawal from them is genuinely brutal, comparable in its severity to alcohol withdrawal. When Tammy was diagnosed with cancer in 2019, his dosage was increased to help him manage the anxiety of watching his wife face something with no survivable precedent. The increased dosage increased the dependency, and when he tried to come off the medication, his body refused to cooperate. His daughter Michaela described what happened in a video that shook everyone who watched it. He had been in unbearable physical distress for 8 months while trying to withdraw. He developed akathisia, a condition that creates a relentless, irresistible internal restlessness bordering on panic and an inability to sit still. The condition made him suicidal. He was treated in multiple North American hospitals. Nothing worked. In early 2020, in what Michaela described as extreme desperation, after running out of options closer to home, the family flew him to Russia for an emergency benzodiazepine detox. He was placed in a medically induced coma. He spent 4 weeks in the ICU. He nearly died several times. He came out of Russia free of the medication, but with serious neurological complications that would follow him for years. He then went to Serbia for further rehabilitation. He came home to Toronto in October 2020 and posted a video titled "Return Home." He looked exhausted in ways that went beyond tiredness. He had been through something that very few people survive, and that even fewer survive intact. The benzodiazepine crisis did not simply end when he came home. The neurological effects of severe benzodiazepine withdrawal, particularly when it involves a period as extreme as what Peterson went through, can persist for years. He developed ongoing neuropathy and weakness that his family connected to the withdrawal and its aftermath. He developed sensitivities to a range of medications that complicated any future medical treatment. His body had been changed by what happened in 2019 and 2020 in ways that would create serious problems 5 years later, when the next crisis arrived. He published Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life in 2021, which became another international bestseller, demonstrating that the intellectual part of what he did had survived intact even if his body was still recovering. He resigned from his tenured position at the University of Toronto that same year. He returned to podcasting, continued appearing in conversations with major public figures, and launched Peterson Academy, an online educational platform built around long-form lectures from academics and intellectuals. He was functioning, he was rebuilding, but anyone who watched him closely during those years noticed he seemed more fragile than the man who had sold out theaters 3 years earlier. He was not the same physically. He was working with what he had left. And what he had left was, for a while, enough to keep going. Then the summer of 2025 arrived. He came home from Russia and Serbia. He recovered enough to write another book, to return to his podcast, and to keep speaking. But his body was carrying damage from the withdrawal that had not fully healed. And in the summer of 2025, something completely ordinary and completely unexpected triggered the worst health crisis of his life. The mold in his dead father's basement, and the crisis that put him in the ICU. In the summer of 2025, Jordan Peterson was helping clean out his recently deceased grandfather's house. It was the kind of task that families do after a loss, going through rooms, sorting through a lifetime of accumulated belongings, and making decisions about what stays and what goes. During that process, he was exposed to mold. This sounds like a small thing. For most people, it would be. For Jordan Peterson, whose immune system had been through the benzodiazepine crisis and whose body had been carrying neurological complications for years, it was not a small thing at all. His daughter Mikhaila announced in October 2025 through a tearful video update that her father had been diagnosed with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, a condition she described as having been building in him since at least 2017, when his severe food allergies and sensitivities had first appeared but had not yet been identified by name. CIRS, as she explained it, involves a genetic predisposition that prevents the immune system from correctly identifying and clearing mold and bacterial toxins from the body. The mold exposure during the house cleaning triggered a full immune system crisis. Within weeks, the CIRS had progressed to pneumonia and sepsis. Peterson was rushed to the hospital. He spent nearly a month in the ICU. Mikhaila described the situation as near death more than once. She said she did not know if her father was going to make it. She was crying as she told people this. She is not someone who cries easily in public, which made the video harder to watch than almost anything else the family had put out during any previous crisis. The medical situation developed further complications. After the pneumonia, Peterson was diagnosed with polyneuropathy, a condition involving damage to multiple nerves throughout the body. He was subsequently diagnosed with myopathy, a condition affecting the muscles. His body was failing in multiple directions simultaneously, and the sensitivity he had developed to medications after the benzodiazepine withdrawal made treating the new conditions considerably more complicated than it would otherwise have been. Doctors were working with specialists to understand the full picture. The family asked publicly for prayers and patience. The recovery had no fixed timeline. He left the ICU in October 2025. He remained hospitalized through November and into December. He was discharged from the hospital in December 2025 and returned home, where he continues recovering under assisted care. His team has been running Peterson Academy, his online educational platform, in his absence since October 2025. His daughter Michaela, who also runs the Peterson Academy operations, has given periodic updates describing the recovery as slow and strenuous. As of early 2026, he has not returned to public life. He has not recorded new content. He has not appeared publicly since June 2025. He was discharged from the hospital in December 2025 and is recovering at home. The man who spent years telling other people to get their lives in order has spent most of the past 7 years fighting for his own. And looking at the whole picture of what he and his family have been through, there is something important that goes beyond the medical details. What the full story actually tells you about Jordan Peterson. People who disagreed with Jordan Peterson spent years arguing about his ideas. That debate is real, and it matters. And it is not the subject of this video. What this video is about is a person, a specific human being with a wife and children, and a body that has been through extraordinary punishment across a period that started when he was at the absolute height of his influence and has not yet fully ended. The picture that emerges from the full timeline is not the picture of a man who was invincible, which is sometimes how public figures get treated when they are at their most visible. It is the picture of a man who was already under enormous strain when the worst things started happening. The part of this story that deserves more attention than it usually receives is how long he kept it private. He was in physical distress from the benzodiazepine dependency for 8 months before his family went public. 8 months of suffering that he did not discuss publicly, while he was still the most talked about intellectual voice in the English-speaking world. He was not complaining. He was not posting about it. He was quietly trying to get through something that, by his daughter's account, nearly killed him more than once. That is not the behavior of someone who uses suffering for attention. That is the behavior of someone who takes seriously the idea that you should carry your own weight before asking others to carry it for you. He was managing his own anxiety with a medication that was slowly building a dependency he did not know was forming. He was watching his wife face a cancer diagnosis so rare that nobody could offer her any real hope. He was touring the world, doing hundreds of lectures, while both of those things were happening simultaneously, because that was the commitment he had made, and he kept it. By the time the benzodiazepine crisis became public in early 2020, he had been in physical distress for 8 months without telling anyone outside the family. His daughter said he nearly died several times. He went to Russia because his family ran out of options closer to home. These are not the choices of a man who was managing things badly. These are the choices of a family dealing with something that the available medical system in Canada and the United States could not solve, making increasingly desperate decisions to keep a husband and father alive. The 2025 crisis adds another layer to the picture. His body had been changed by the benzodiazepine withdrawal in ways that made him more vulnerable to what came next. The mold exposure that triggered CIRS would have been manageable for most people. For someone carrying the neurological aftermath of what he went through in 2019 and 2020, it was not manageable. The crises are connected. Each one left him weaker in specific ways that made the next one more dangerous. That is not bad luck running in a straight line. That is a cascade, each event feeding into the conditions that made the next one worse. Tammy's recovery remains one of the more remarkable things in the entire story. She is alive. She entered the Catholic Church. She has her own podcast. The cancer that every doctor said would kill her within 10 months did not. Jordan Peterson described her recovery as miraculous and said it changed how he thinks about faith. Whatever someone thinks about his public positions on politics and culture and religion, the private life underneath all of those positions has been genuinely, verifiably, documentably brutal. And he carried most of it without saying a word, until his family had no choice but to tell the public what was happening. Of everything Jordan Peterson and his family have faced in the past 7 years, which part of the story hit you the hardest? And do you think he will return to public life the same person he was before all of this happened? Drop both answers in the comments, hit like, and subscribe so you do not miss what we cover next.